Some Western countries have banned pro-Palestinian demonstrations, saying they could disturb public order. But tens of thousands of people in other parts of the world have joined rallies in support of the Palestinians and against the Israeli bombardment of Gaza that followed the terrorist attacks by Hamas. Many are calling for an immediate ceasefire and the protection of civilians.
Thousands of kilometers away from the Gaza Strip, these protesters in Australia are expressing solidarity with the Palestinians, demanding a just solution to the conflict.
I think now that the status quo has been broken, we see what the consequences of this state of affairs is, where for 75 years the international community has not intervened. I think now it is very clear that we cannot ignore the situation because it will continue to lead to violence unless something is done. And I think the world is increasingly beginning to understand that it can no longer ignore the rights of the Palestinian people.
Strong shows of support too for the Palestinians in the Chilean capital, Santiago.
75 years of occupation, of suffering, of oppressed people who cannot stand it anymore. I am very, very sorry for the victims on both sides. I do not support any death from any side.
In the streets of the Danish capital, Copenhagen, and outside the White House in Washington, D.C. In London, tens of thousands of protesters called for a free Palestine, many demanding an immediate ceasefire.
It's appalling. What happened last Saturday makes me feel I was shocked, really shocked. But what I'm seeing now is just war crime from Israel.
Thousands of people are out in the streets in Muslim-majority nations of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the conflict-ridden country of Yemen. Authorities in Germany's financial capital, Frankfurt, banned a pro-Palestinian rally. The non-compliance with the order led to scuffles between the protesters and the police, an action the administration justifies.
Anyone who denies Israel's right to exist, who want to attack Jewish life, who call for violence, or who tolerate the barbarism of Hamas, even in the slightest, is not protected by the right of assembly, nor by democracy. And that is why we have banned the rally.
In Paris, too, police stopped a banned pro-Palestinian rally.
Is this democracy? I'm sorry, it's not a country of law here. I'm sorry, I'm outraged. And frankly, I voted for Emmanuel Macron, and I regret it. I regret it.
With no signs of the conflict coming to an end, emotions worldwide are raging.
I'm now joined for more by our reporter, Binish Javed. Binish, you've looked at the international reactions to these latest developments. What's driving these pro-Palestinian protests?
Gerhard, instead of condemning the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel, the focus of these protests has been Israeli strikes. And many of these protesters are saying that civilians are a collateral damage in these strikes, and they're asking that these strikes be stopped. Now, many of the protesters are also saying that Palestinians for long have been living under an occupation, and they have been treated in unjust and unfair way. And the anger is not only directed towards Israel, it's also directed towards international community, and especially to Western powers. The protesters say that their response has been unjust, and for long they have failed in the diplomacy to find a just solution to the conflict.
Is that the only reason that so much of this anger is directed at Western powers, predominantly the US, I should think, and not Hamas?
So I think one of the reasons why these protesters are saying that the Western powers' response is, so basically they say that in the recent conflict, the response from the Western powers is more supportive towards Israel and is less considerate towards the Palestinian people who are just now caught up in this conflict. And I think one of the root causes or one of the reasons behind these protests is also the anti-US sentiment, especially in Muslim-majority countries, and that anti-US sentiment that increased significantly after 9/11. So during US war on terror, many of the countries that saw US military interventions were Muslim countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and these military interventions caused a lot of destruction. Militias were formed, thousands of civilians were killed. So there's this element of anti-US sentiment, and many of these people see in the current conflict Israel as an extension of the West or as a strong ally of the US. And therefore, that is also the anger that we see in these protests.
There are also signs that this conflict could be fueling political extremism in other countries. Are there any signs for that?
I think that is one of the most worrying trends. So Hamas, which is considered a terrorist organization by US, by Germany, EU, and many other countries, that terrorist organization is being glorified by religious groups in countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh. There have been rallies in these countries with thousands of followers of these religious groups. And in these rallies, you can see you can hear fiery speeches of these religious leaders glorifying Hamas and portraying Hamas as a hero organization. And what we saw in Syria, that Islamic State was able to recruit people not only from Muslim countries, but also from Western countries. And the fear is that with these fiery speeches and hatred against Israel and glorification of Hamas, many of these people could be radicalized and they could pick up arms and join armed groups or terrorist groups whose agenda is to fight the Western world.
Binish, thank you very much, Binish.